Hey, are you ready to grow your business? You have checked out the number one resource for business leaders, entrepreneurs, startup founders, and managers. And we're going to teach you how to grow and scale your business with real actionable steps. There's no fluff in this podcast. It's just good advice. Check out this episode. If you're a first-time listener, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. And if you enjoy this episode, leave us a 5-star review. Today's episode is with Ryan Frederick, who's the founder of AWH and also the author of 2 books, Sell Naked and Other Advice for Growing and Managing Service Firms, and The Founder's Manual, a guidebook for becoming a successful entrepreneur. In fact, if you've been wondering how to become a successful entrepreneur, this is the episode for you. This is such an incredibly honest conversation where Ryan is really going to peel back a little bit more about his journey. And also all those things you see on social media that talk about how easy entrepreneurship is and how easy it is to run a business. Those of you who are already running a business, you know how that is not always quite the case. But Ryan gives such a phenomenal perspective. He gives an honest insight on the journey you can expect in running and growing a business. Stay tuned. Here comes your good advice. Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Good Advice Podcast. Welcome to the show. Thanks for listening. You might be in your car, you might be in your home office, you might even be at work, and wherever you are, hopefully you're listening to the podcast because you're looking for good advice on how to grow and scale your business. It could be a business you're working on right now. It could be something that maybe you're dreaming about. You're thinking about that, getting away from the 9-to-5 hustle and starting something that you've been, you feel like it's inside you. It's this entrepreneurial dream that you want to start, that you want to create. We're going to be talking about that journey here today. In fact, today I'm sitting down with Ryan Frederick. Ryan is the founder of AWH, which you can go to awh.net to find out more. It's a digital product firm that helps people launch their digital products from all the way, literally from startup founder moment all the way up to an enterprise who's really scaling their business online. He's also the author of 2 books, Sell Naked and Other Advice for Growing and Managing Service Firms, as well as the author of The Founder's Manual, a guidebook for becoming a successful entrepreneur. There's a lot of noise out there, so we got to listen to the people who really know the right steps to make entrepreneurship work. Ryan, it's so great to have you here today. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me. You have a great broadcaster podcast host voice. So you have found your calling based upon your natural God-given abilities.
I appreciate that. My wife was telling me, she's like, you got to get on Audible and start recording people's books for them. And I was like, I don't know if I have the patience for that. Because, I don't know like what kind of books I would get or what have you, but I think I'll just stick to the podcast. The podcast feels like it's working. And so I appreciate the compliment.
You should totally, I'm writing a 3rd book now, but it's not a business book. It's a relationship book and about dating. So you should totally do the audio version of that.
So that's interesting that you're doing, so you have these 2 books that are out already, which by the way, I love the name Sell Naked. And you have this other book, the Founder's Manual, Guidebook for Becoming a Successful Entrepreneur. You just mentioned you're writing a relationship book. That's a little bit different. So why the change?
Yeah, it is. And I never intended to be an author and to write books. And so with the first one, the Founder's Manual, I just started taking notes, and then I realized that those notes and that outline were sort of the skeleton to a book. So then I was like, well, I've either made this outline and taken these notes for, just selfish purposes and reasons, or I could actually write a book. And so then I found a publisher that was, willing to and interested in doing the book. And then I enjoyed writing the Founder's Manual so much that then I said, all right, well, I've got these other notes on running a services firm. So, hey, publisher, I'm going to start writing this other book. Are you interested? And they said, yes. And then the same thing happened around relationships and dating. I'm 53. I'm divorced. I divorced a few years ago. And I just started writing notes around in my experience in the dating world in midlife. And then I realized, again, I've got sort of the skeleton and the framework for a book. why don't I write it? And so, I don't know. It's an interesting thing that I haven't written the books for them to be commercially successful. I wrote the books because I just felt like I needed to for myself, and I had something to say. And I think that's a really good perspective for creators and even for founders, right? Is that I think too many start the process thinking, oh, well, is this going to be wildly successful? And am I going to make a lot of money? And it's like, sometimes it's worth it just to do something for the sake of doing it. And if there's commercial success associated to it, that's great. But sometimes there is just good grounding in the fact of, I want to do this for me. And if there's something that comes out of it that has commercial success, cool. And so I'm an author, not for the intention of writing and selling a bunch of books, but for really just wanting to document my experiences and my insights. And if that resonates with some people, cool. But if it's also not, if they're not runaway bestsellers, I'm also okay with that.
I want to talk more about that, because what you're talking about is essentially, it's a bit countercultural. Because when you think about the startup journey, the founder's journey, it's been totally beat to death in terms of a cliche of like, I'm creating the next Uber, I'm creating the next Facebook, I'm creating the next. A lot of people don't realize that we call them unicorns because they are mythical, they don't exist, right? But yet, everyone who starts their startup, that's their trajectory in their mind, is I'm going to start something that's wildly successful. And it's not always, it doesn't feel like it's always our own fault. If we look, and this is why I say it's counterculture, what you're saying, if we look at social media, if we go to whatever, startup events, a lot of times that is the narrative being pushed. It's sort of like the Russell Brunson, you're just one funnel away. You're just one step away from creating this incredibly successful product or service. You're talking about something that's a little bit different, where it's like you're getting into this journey and success is this byproduct that comes with it. I'd love to hear more about that line of thinking.
Yeah, I think, look, most things don't work, right? Most software products, don't ever go anywhere, and they end up in the graveyard of software products. Most books don't have great commercial success. Most screenplays don't get accepted and never turn into a show or a movie. And so most things don't work. That doesn't mean you still shouldn't do it and pursue it if indeed you're compelled to do it. And I think in my experience, the best founders have been the unintentional ones, the ones who have lived in and around a problem for, a decade. And they know the problem well because of that. They've been affected by the problem because of that. They understand the ramifications of the problem and the value of the problem because they've lived with it for that long. And they finally get to a point where they're like, okay, well, now I'm gonna have the intention of trying to do something about the problem and to bring a solution to bear around the problem. But they don't go into it saying they want to be the next great big IPO, right? They go into it because they now feel like they're almost compelled to now bring a solution to the problem. And I think that for me, those are the best founders, those are the best products, those are the best companies, those are the best stories. And it's not the people that are chasing some sort of elusive fame, celebrity, and money, because the unintentional founders will also see their way through the journey. That they also don't glamorize the journey. They don't think the journey is something that it's not. People that start companies, build products, and that create things like books and other things that do it for the end outcomes at the beginning are almost always disappointed. If you go into it saying, I'm just going to value this for the journey and for what I can potentially do to help people and to add value, and then whatever the outcomes are going to be, that's a much better grounded perspective that makes the journey, one, more palatable, and two, sees you through the tough times, right? Because there are going to be there are going to be tough times in creating anything and trying to bring anything to market. And if you start from the perspective of, I'm less concerned about the outcome at the beginning than I am just the process of providing value, then you're probably going to be in a better mindset to deal with the tough times.
It feels like the people who come on the podcast too, and I don't know if they would self-describe it as like finding lightning in the bottle, or they've created something that works. It feels like the people who come on the podcast, they say something really similar to what you just said. And that's that creating a successful venture, whatever it is, it ultimately is about solving the problems of the customer. And yet it feels like much of what we see online is that stroking of one's ego, that glamorization, the sort of, I call it entrepreneurial pornography. It's like, this incredible, like sexy image of, you quit your job. And I was even talking to someone he was talking about how he was craving to be an entrepreneur. And I said, well, what do you think that means? Because I know for me, it's really excruciating. So what do you think that means? And he said, oh, it's awesome. You sleep in as late as you want and no one tells you what to do.
Oh, please.
And I think that's probably called immaturity, actually. But
right.
But you're talking about something that I feel like I keep hearing it over and over again. And it's such an incredible insight. It's about your journey being focused on the people you're serving, and you're compelled to serve those people and help those people, rather than, I'm gonna get mine, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's true. And I think that those are the enduring companies and the enduring products and the enduring founders, because, there's also, huge myths out there that you can build something in a couple of years that's going to have, significant value, and you're going to be able to then kick back and sort of just relax. And it also doesn't work that way typically, because even companies that you look back at and say, oh, I just heard of them and now they're IPOing. Well, there's a lot more under the iceberg than you can see above the water. And the same thing is true with companies and books and movies and whatever. I mean, Nomadland just won, the Oscar for Best Picture, and Nomad was a grinded out, underfunded, right, lack of support, right, documentary about that woman's life and that sort of lifestyle. And so now they've won an Oscar, fabulous. But who was there when, they were sleeping on cots and they were completely unsupported and underfunded? That's when you show your mettle, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the journey that every entrepreneur and every creator goes through, that nobody's there to see how early you got up and what the late nights were like, mm-hmm. and the sleeping on cots and wondering if you're going to make payroll and, mm-hmm. and how you're going to make payroll and all of those things. So the journey is not glamorous whatsoever. People just see the outcomes, but what they then fail to recognize is, well, what did it take to get there? And there are very few overnight successes, and it takes 10 years on average, and is typical, right, to build something of any value and substance. Most people don't want to put 10 years into something. Mm-hmm. They just don't, right? Mm-hmm. And that's not new. It gets blamed on sort of impatience now and social media influence and impulsivity. People 2 decades ago also didn't want to put 10 years into an endeavor to try to make it work. So it's not really, maybe it's amplified now, but I've been doing this for 30 years now. And I can tell you 2 decades ago, people also didn't want to commit 10 years to see if something would work or not. But that's really what it takes. I've now written 2 books. I'm in the process of writing a third. Unfortunately, for the first book and the readers and buyers of the first book, I'm a better writer now than I was writing the first book. That's how it goes, right? And that's why investors want to fund, repeat founders and multiple sort of company founders, is because investors then know you came into it sort of wide-eyed and bushy-tailed in the first company, And now you understand how this really works, and you understand how what it really means to be a founder when you probably didn't the first time you took a bat at it.
You know, the people who are listening, who they've been on their entrepreneurial journey for a while, they're listening to you and they're thinking, oh yeah, that is absolutely the grind of entrepreneurship. But I somewhat feel, I don't know if it's right to say I feel bad for people who are listening, and I mentioned this at the start of the podcast, the people who are listening, who they're sort of dreaming about that endeavor, and maybe they may not even feel that unfulfilled in their day job, but they're just wanting something different. They're hearing you talk about this portrayal of entrepreneurship, this 10-year grind, and it's a bit of a punch to the gut, because it's like, oh, I thought I was going to create something, and in 2 years' time, it was going to be 7 figures. Because again, that is what gets communicated online. I mean, I think digital marketers right now many of them are selling their soul to basically bring in so much revenue from naive entrepreneurs when they say things like, hey, you're one funnel away, you're one email away. Hey, just do this email script and it'll work for you. Does it feel like, you mentioned you've been doing this for 30 years now. Is it harder today than it was 30 years ago to become an entrepreneur and do it right?
In some ways, yes. And in some ways, no. I think there's so much noise, as you put it, sort of entrepreneurial, pornography. I think there's so much noise around, and there's so many hacks, and the hustle culture, I think, is bad because people think that, well, if nobody can even tell you what, it means to hustle, right? Nobody can define that, right? Yeah. And it's because nobody wants to define it, because the people that are out there, the consultants, the coaches, and the hackers are out there selling products and services and advice to potential entrepreneurs, saying, well, we've got the secret sauce, and if you just follow our method, right, then you're going to be successful. All of that is BS, because and can they point to a couple of blips, right, where something worked, and someone did this thing and put out this video that went viral? Sure, but is that formulaic? No. And what is formulaic is, if you understand a problem at a deep level and you get and stay close to customers around solving that problem, you have a chance of doing something that they value and could be successful. Is that fun? No. Is it glamorous? No. Is it going to take some time? Yes. But that's how if you want to ensure some level of success, there are principles that will help ensure that level of success. Or you can take the shortcuts and you can sort of buy the hacker hype and the hustle hype and all that sort of stuff. And are some people going to hit, a strike of gold during that those people and those companies can then point to? Sure. But I would also argue, what's the validity of a lot of those that are set up as examples of it working? Like in my Instagram feed, I see all the time, people saying with sponsored ads, oh, here's how I made 30 grand in a month. Here's how I quit my 9-to-5. I don't even know how much of that is true. Right. All I know is that for me to have success and to be part of success over time is we ground it out using the fundamentals and the principles, and it's far from what these people are conveying and trying to sell to would-be entrepreneurs. And I think there's a lot of money in the entrepreneurial ecosystem that is mostly just thrashing, and it's not anybody really accomplishing anything.
Yeah. Well, and I do want to go back to your comment on staying close to the customers, because I think that's a really incredible insight that I want to visit before we're done today. But going back to what you just said, I think you're so right. And I think we're talking about a 10-year game to build your business. And yet there are people who are communicating something totally different. And I remember when I first started my business, Good Advice, my first marketer I hired, one of his pieces of advice for me was to basically go to the prettiest condo in my town, rent it, and film myself talking about my business on the balcony that like overlooks the city. And I was like, that's surely there's something more I can do marketing wise. I mean, that's pretty dishonest. And he was like, no, that's what sells. And I was like, well, I don't want to do that. And he was like, well, then, we probably shouldn't work together because
then you don't want to succeed.
Yeah. That's another thing I think that's interesting is this sort of flipping of it's flipping the script on the person where it's not working, this very formulaic approach of just do this, just send this email. I saw one the other day that was on LinkedIn DMing, which people who've listened to my podcast know how obnoxiously I talk about how obnoxious it is. And yet I was watching this conversation transpire where someone was saying, you just send this DM and then you send the follow-up and then that will lead you to the sale. And it wasn't working. And the person was saying, well, you must not be doing it right. And here I am as the bystander thinking, it just doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that simply. But instead of us owning that, it's very much this exactly what you just said. It's flipping it on the aspiring entrepreneur and blaming them. We're talking about a 10-year game with all of this noise, all of these challenges. How the heck does someone stay motivated, diligent, hardworking? I mean, I feel like we're all super jazzed about our business that first year, maybe even the second year. But then when the third year rolls around and the fourth year, or like, wow, I've been doing this 5 years now. How does someone stay hungry year in and year out with all the noise that's happening?
Yeah, I think and that's why I dislike the hustle narrative and culture a lot, because that implies that you're going to get a quick return on your hustle input. And I think if you're not an incredibly disciplined person, your chances of making it as an entrepreneur or a creator are almost zero.
Jeez.
Because what building a successful product company and then piece of creativity like a book or a movie or a song or whatever, it's not about are you talented and are you gifted and are you smart, etc. Can you apply enough discipline for long enough to give it a chance to work? And great songwriters aren't great songwriters, right? They understand the craft. They understand the profession. They've put in their time to then write a song that becomes a hit. Same thing with entrepreneurs, right? If you spend enough time around a problem and customers working to solve that problem in a way that those customers value, that's not going to happen overnight. But if you keep showing up and you keep iterating on it and you keep doing it, eventually, even someone of average intelligence and average experience is going to be able to then get to a point that they have something of value. I'm convinced of that. Mm. And there's an example that I use that is somewhat frowned upon, but I think it's just a good example around the discipline that it takes. Network marketing companies, right? Amway and all the others, right? Anybody can be successful at that. The ones who are successful are the ones who do it over a very long period of time in a very disciplined way. Mm-hmm. Now, we can debate whether network marketing companies add value and whether they're good, and whether the products are any better than you get anywhere else, et cetera. But what I respect about that is anybody can do it. You don't need a particular background. You don't need a particular pedigree. And the ones that succeed at it are the same people that they would succeed at another endeavor because they bring a level of discipline to it that when you look at it, you're like, wow, no wonder you've built a huge business selling skin lotion because you've grinded for 10 years to now have 10,000 people under you all selling one bottle of lotion a month, right? Mm-hmm. But that's what it takes inside of any business, right? And inside of any endeavor. But the counter to that is most people aren't disciplined, right? Most people want to be comfortable. Most people want to hit the easy button. Most people don't want to, push themselves. They don't want to test the limits. and they want it to come easy. And the things in life that are valuable don't come easy, right? And you have to work at them.
It's the power of consistency and showing up. And it does feel like you're spot on with, and you see it a lot, actually. I mean, social media is incredibly lucrative for people's businesses. And yet, someone does one post and then they say, well, I guess it doesn't work, right? Or they do one video and they say, I guess it doesn't work. Or someone says, hey, I'm gonna start a podcast. And they do a podcast a week for, a month. And they say, well, I guess that didn't work. You're talking about the power of consistency month after month after month, and even year after year after year. Just since we're running low on time, I want to make sure I ask you, or I want to go back to a comment you made on being close to your customers. And I think this is a brilliant insight that all of us, wherever we are in our business, it's just a good rule of thumb. This concept of being close to our customers. And it feels like a lot of times, many of us, whenever we start a business or we create a product, we have an image in our mind of who will use it and what they'll think about it. And it's even things like, oh, this thing's really cool, it's really awesome, and it helps people in this way. And yet, often there is not a lot of dialogue happening with customers, where customers can actually, or sometimes that it actually does happen. A customer says, I don't really like that very much. And rather than listening to that, a lot of times, because it's our baby, we say, well, they didn't understand it, or that wasn't the right customer. That was someone else. Talk to me a little bit more about this concept of being near to your customers and letting them really feed the innovation or the iteration of your product or service.
Yeah, we either don't value customer input and relationships because of ego, or because it's too hard. And ego is some of the things that you said, which is doesn't align with our vision, isn't the product that we want to build. So we're going to ignore their feedback. We're going to invalidate what they said because we're then going to say, oh, well, we were working with the wrong customer, et cetera. On the other side of it, where, we want to make sure that we build something, that is in our vision because people are messy. Right. And so getting and staying close to customers is hard because people are complicated. Mm-hmm. And do we want to put in the time and effort to really work with customers iteratively over time to make sure what's getting created is going to add value for them? We want to get away from customers as fast as we can because they challenge us and they say no, and they don't like what we've done and they don't like our approach. And so and that's where the discipline comes in, because customers will sometimes disagree, or they'll just flat out tell you that you're wrong. And we don't want to hear that because we've already invested X amount of time, X amount of thought, X amount of energy into this problem and the way that we've thought about it. And if a customer says, nope, you're thinking about it entirely wrong and you're going about it entirely wrong, then we look at everything we've already put into it as then being a waste. Mm-hmm. And that's hard for us to process and hard for us to come to terms with. And so I've seen companies and founders who have received customer input and they've completely ignored it and discounted it because it wasn't the direction they wanted to go with the product and the company. Mm-hmm. And what I've said to them, you realize that they were giving you direction and you've now chosen to ignore it. And in one case, the founder actually said, yeah, I know, but that's not the product and company that I envisioned building. And I'm like, do you want to be right, or do you want to do the right thing? Mm-hmm. And oftentimes founders want to be right more than they want to do the right thing.
Well, and it goes back to this concept of it almost feels like becoming a founder, we get misaligned on, I eventually want to get on stage and talk about my awesome entrepreneurial journey, rather than remembering why I got into the business, and that was to serve my customers. So, Ryan, we are unfortunately out of time today. This has been an awesome conversation. I feel bad. We didn't even get into your business and what you do for a living. I'm sure there's plenty of people who could use your advice and use your direction and use your insight. Tell our listeners just a little bit about what does it look like for them to connect with you, but more importantly, to maybe even work with you. What does that look like for my listeners?
Yeah, so the best place to go is awh.net. So I now, one of the hats that I wear is I own a product firm. We build digital products for clients, startups up to enterprises. And then I work with services firms to help them sort of evolve their services firms because they're starting a product company, which, now is typically software, and then services firms. And services firms are sort of their own beast inside of business types, because services firms are really easy to start. Anybody can put out a shingle and say, yep, I provide this service. Services firms are incredibly hard to grow because they're so people dependent and they're so manual, and you don't get the exponential sort of return and scalability that you do with product companies. So services firms are their own sort of animal to deal with. So awh.net, best place to start if somebody wants to engage in a conversation around building a software product or figuring out how they grow their services firm.
Ryan, it's been great talking to you today. I appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Good to be with you.
Hey, for our listeners, I'm going to put the link to awh.net down in the episode description below. I'm also going to put the link to both of Ryan's book. Again, Sail Naked and Other Advice for Growing and Managing Service Firms, as well as The Founder's Manual, a guidebook for becoming a successful entrepreneur. Both of those, their Amazon links are going to be down in the episode description below, so make sure you check those out. And hey, if you enjoyed this episode, what the heck are you waiting on? Click that subscribe button, click that follow button so you keep getting good advice wherever you are. And don't forget, we are on Patreon. If you're loving the podcast, you want to support the podcast, or even get your business advertised on the podcast, you can go to patreon.com/goodadvice and find out more information there. As always, I appreciate you. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you later. See ya.